President Obama's Theology. The Theology of President Obama's Christian Theocracy. Part 4. Black Liberation Theology's Theological Rationale. Again, we are continuing this examination of the theology of President Obama. We're doing this in order that we can better understand what is driving this man's political, social, and cultural policies in America. And I think as you begin to listen to what I am telling you, as this teaching becomes more and more clear, and I realize there are some very hard concepts involved here because they're very complex. They're anchored in philosophical and theological terms. But as we try to express and explain them, I think his National Prayer Breakfast speech and the analysis that we did, you will be able to begin to discern this man is living out his theology. He is building his theocracy as he understands it in America. Again, we need you to give due consideration to what we are explaining because this is important for you to understand. Beginning with the accepted principle that the God of Israel and the church are involved in history and are to affect the salvation of men and women, black liberation theologians also contend that to view salvation as having an exclusive spiritual connotation is an irresponsible truncation of its true meaning. Rather, inherent in the concept of salvation are also economic, political, and social dimensions, which, if left out of the formulation, renders the gospel as impotent and useless, since it has no transforming effect for the present condition of the oppressed or the poor. Again, think the theology of change. Change is not bad, but it depends on the philosophy and theology that's driving the change. In all liberation theology, people are often directed to the Exodus event, in which these dimensions are clearly evident. The conclusion is drawn from the idea that God's election of His people and His liberation of them from a variety of conditions of bondage are directly related to the vision and the mission that the church ought to be carrying out. In addition, it is held that God is not neutral on these matters. James Cone, quoting Karl Barth approvingly, says, Barth, quote, "In the relations and events in the life of His people, God always takes His stand unconditionally and passionately on this side alone, against those who already enjoy right and privileges, and on behalf of those who are denied it and deprived of it." Again, listen to the Black Liberation Cone. He approves this quote of Karl Barth, and thus he ties even more closely black liberation theology to that which is being identified as Protestant Christianity. Again, Karl Barth states, in the relations and events in life of His people, God always takes His stand unconditionally and passionately on this side alone, against those who already enjoy right and privilege, and on behalf of those who are denied it and deprived of it. The case is made for Jesus' international identification with the same categories of individuals based both upon the accusations of His enemies and upon His own teachings. Thus, the true nature of Christ's work is found in the Gospel of Luke, where we find the primary text for all liberation theologies. For here it is perceived that Jesus' work is essentially one of liberation. Listen to what is recorded of our Lord in Luke chapter 4 and verses 18 through 19. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to recover the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Does this sound familiar to you? Did you not hear this same theme in a national prayer breakfast speech not too long ago? Again, we preach the gospel of liberation to the poor. We're here to heal the brokenhearted, those who have been oppressed. Proclaim liberty to those who are in captivity, to the oppressors, that they may be free from their oppression. To give sight to those who are blind, to set at liberty those who are the oppressed. Both testaments of the Bible, therefore, are viewed as witnessing to the fact that recognition of God's liberating activity is integral to an understanding of His dealing with His own people. James Cone, along with other black liberation theologians or black power groups, conclude that given this unmistakable commitment to the poor and oppressed, it may be assumed that in the 20th and now in the 21st century, Christ's radical identification would really be with blackness. For just as identification with Israel clearly spoke to God's taking the side of the weak and the oppressed in the ancient world, so identification with blackness would be the most effectively and easily discerned symbol of that choice in contemporary society, and in particular in contemporary American society. It follows thus that obedience to God in the present generation requires of Christians a similar identification with the poor and the oppressed. That identification with blackness. James Cone consequently defines heresy as this: any activity or teaching that denies the lordship of Christ, or a word that refuses to acknowledge His liberating presence in the struggle for freedom. Heresy is the refusal to speak the truth in light of the one who is the truth. That's how black liberation theology defines heresy, how it identifies all heretics.